Well, Shabbat, New Year's Eve, Shalom. So there is something very interesting going on with our Torah portion. We begin Parshat Va'era this week, the second Parsha in the book of Exodus. Last week, in Parshat Shemot, our people had become enslaved by Pharaoh, and God called to Moses from a burning bush and told him it was time to deliver the Hebrews from their suffering. And so Moses returned to Mitzrayim to do just that. Now, when the Torah was originally crafted, the scribes put quill to parchment. There were no chapters or periods or verse delineations. But over time, groups of rabbis in different generations would come to demarcate the beginning of a chapter, a new parsha, and even to add trope, the musical notes on each word. But here, in the space between Shemot, last week's Torah portion, and Va'era, this week's Torah portion, they did something especially worth noting on this eve of our secular New Year. Va'era this week begins with chapter 6, verse 2. It begins with God telling Moses who God is in relation to his ancestors. That's chapter 6, verse 2 is where it begins. That's interesting and weird. Why? Because it means that the last Parsha, Shemot, ended on chapter 6, verse 1, instead of at its natural stopping point, the end of chapter 5, which is chapter 5, verse 23. They tack on to that Parsha, chapter 6, verse 1, before ending it. Why is that, we might ask? Because the last verse of chapter 5, verse 23, ends with Moses angrily berating and doubting God, saying, "Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with his people. And still you, God, have not delivered your people." That's very fiery stuff. But Jewish tradition does not permit a Torah portion to end on a negative note. Same is true for a single chanted aliyah. So to end Shemot in such a desperate and angry way wouldn't work. And so the rabbis tack on the first verse of chapter 6 to the last parsha so that it ends instead with God telling Moses, "You will soon see what I will do. Pharaoh will let them go because of a greater might." It ends on a promise, a future, and a reassurance that Moses' rabble-rousing and the people's suffering is not all meaningless. In the liminal space of betweeniness, the rabbis have chosen to shape how our story is told and experienced. It is this beautiful and malleable space between the two parshiot that holds, I think, a great teaching for us tonight. Just as the rabbis use the liminal space between what was and what will be to define their own story, so perhaps we have the same power sitting here in our liminal space at the end of one year and the beginning of the next. 2021 has been described in so many ways, some of them inappropriate for a Shabbat service. It has been described as extraordinary. Life-saving vaccines made it into the arms of millions of people around the world, including some as young as 5 years old. Amazing. And also we have incurred immeasurable loss from a pandemic that just doesn't know how to quit us. We have seen and helped pass generation-defining bipartisan legislation in the infrastructure bill. And we have watched critical voting rights, a woman's right to choose, and climate legislation fight for oxygen or take huge steps backwards. We have seen a reform rabbi elected to Israel's Knesset. And we have seen the love for Israel used as a wedge between people in this country. We have seen love skyrocket as we've found this community to be a lifeline. And we have also lost beloveds this year and sometimes felt lonely or angry or afraid. We have laughed. We have cried. We have primally screamed together by the Prospect Park waters. We have experienced fires and tornadoes and floods, but we have also collectively woken up to the urgency of stopping climate chaos. We have seen political unrest, and we have demanded accountability. We have block partied and lit up the night and danced with Torahs and found one another again inside of our beautiful walls. And as numbers again surge, we have returned to our virtual space. May we be together again soon, just on the cusp of 2022. On their own cusp, the rabbis determined that they would not write a rough-edged ending. They wanted instead to write a bridge into the story that would come next. They did not forget or whitewash what were the hardest parts of that first chapter, but they also determined that they would not let those define them. They were in control of their story, and perhaps we are in control of ours too. To give meaning to all of our high hills and our deep valleys, and to not just let the hard parts mow us down, but to decide, to choose how they have changed us as we pause and breathe in this liminal space before the next chapter begins. How have you been changed this year? How have we grown? What did we each add to the world this year? And how is this world better because you were in it this year? Because it is. Jewish life is full of these liminal moments of transition, time that neither belongs to what was or what will be. Twilight into Shabbat, birth into bris, childhood into b'nai mitzvah, even life into death. And each of these moments of pause and reflection are ritualized and made sacred through blessing, specifically, in fact, through the chance to bless one another. The blessing of our children on Shabbat, the priestly benediction throughout our ritual life cycle events, even a dying person blesses those they leave behind. And here we are too, about to cross the threshold into a new year. We find a chance to bless one another here too, with all of the sweetness and the love and the luck and the courage and the great wine, or the healthy choices, or the more sleep, or the louder laughter, whatever are the tools that you think we need to enter into 2022 and to thrive there. So I want to invite you, if you will, to open your chat or go onto your Facebook comments, or I think YouTube can let you chat also, and to go into that space now and to write a blessing for the new year. And what I want to invite you to do is to take a look in the screen, and the prompt is, may the year 2022 bring you. May the year 2022 bring you. And take a look at this screen, and you'll see some names and you'll see some faces, or maybe on Facebook, you need to close your eyes and imagine who else you're joining with here today, and pick somebody and write them a blessing. Pick somebody you know, pick somebody you don't know. Write them a blessing. May the year 2022 bring you. And once we've built up some of our blessings, we will come back together for our concluding of this particular moment of this enormous opportunity to bless one another as a community has the chance to do.